Hi, my name is Clare and I'm the mother of 3 teenagers with FASD.
I'm Jessica, a PhD researcher specialising in educational interventions for children with FASD.
And together we are the hosts of Spotlight on FASD, the UK's first podcast dedicated to shining a spotlight on fetal alcohol spectrum disorders.
FASD is a condition caused by prenatal alcohol exposure that affects hundreds of thousands of children across the UK.
And we're here to bring these conversations out of the shadows and make sure that no one living with FASD feels alone. Hi everybody and welcome back to the next episode of Spotlight on FASD. This week we are joined by Martin Clarke, and Martin is a trainer and educator of all things FASD and predominantly works with foster carers. So predominantly does training with foster carers, and he has done this for over a decade for TACT care. So we just want to pick Martin's brains this week, and he's been in the field for a long time and we just wanted to share that with you. So we hope you enjoy it, and we're really looking forward to listening to Martin this week ourselves. So
yeah. Yes. Hello, Martin.
Hello. Thank you for letting me join you.
Oh, thank you for joining us. We're really excited to have you, and I think training in any world around FASD is growing and is a really interesting area. We've come across a lot of people who we've spoken to who delve into it on their own. It's not sort of come from their job or something like that. They have their own personal reasons, and we know that training foster carers is going to be extremely important because of the higher numbers of children in care who have been prenatally exposed to alcohol. So it's a very important job that you're doing. So we're really excited to have you here. So can you tell us a little bit about your own personal FASD journey? So when you first stumbled across those letters and became aware of the condition.
Yes, absolutely. It's relatively recently within my social work career, really, which is embarrassing and a bit shaming personally, because I originally qualified as a social worker, or started doing social work, maybe it's the better way of phrasing it, in 1979. So we're talking 41 years, and it's only in the last 13 of those that I've been aware of fetal alcohol, which kind of fills me with the fact that 28 years I was a practicing social worker without a clue about fetal alcohol. And just to kind of explain what I was doing, I was working for 5 years with the NSPCC as an inspector in the old days of inspectors, and then I was working in various local authorities in Derbyshire and in Northamptonshire, and also worked for Action for Children in a family centre. And all that time I was working with families and totally unaware, oblivious completely to anything around fetal alcohol. And I look back now and I think of some of the cases that I was involved in and the young people that I was involved in. And I was responsible, not solely, but I was responsible or involved in removing a lot of children from families where the children were said to be beyond the parents' control, or that the parenting wasn't deemed good enough. And I look back now, because we took those children to care. They didn't do any better in foster care. They probably ended up in children's homes, and that, it was a kind of a gradual decline. Mm-hmm. And if I'd known about fetal alcohol then and had explored that as a potential hypothesis, I think I would have found fetal alcohol present in so many of those children. Mm-hmm. And we wouldn't have needed to remove them and split families up. So I'm kind of, part of my motivation in delivering the training is around the fact that I cocked up for 28 years. And I need to we need, as social work, we need to kind of change our practice and kind of recognise that fetal alcohol, we're just not recognising it, and it just fills me with sort of alarm. And I know people in my current agency think I'm just an obsessive. I keep going on about fetal alcohol all the time, and they think, change the record, but I'm not. I'm going to keep going. It came into my life as you put it, where did my journey start? Was 13 years ago. I said for 28 years I'd been a social worker, frontline social worker, child protection mostly, and then I left Northamptonshire and came into fostering, and I moved into TACT, which is a fostering charity, and I was a social worker for a couple of years there, helping to supervise social work foster placements. And then the vacancy came up for a kind of a training officer within TACT, and I applied for that. Obviously nobody else applied because they gave me the job, and I became a training officer. And at the same time that I became the training officer at TACT, we merged, or acquired, took over, I don't know what the phrase would be, a smaller voluntary adoption agency. At that time, TACT had an adoption service as well. And we took over or merged with this other agency, one called Parents for Children. And Parents for Children had a kind of their uniqueness, their selling point was that they only worked with fetally affected children. That was their kind of, I say their USP, if you like. They found adoptive parents for fetally affected children. So suddenly we acquired this little agency who had run into financial issues, which is why we acquired them, who had this vast expertise, knowledge, passion around the topic. And it was agreed that one of the first things that TACT would do would be to maintain that mission on their behalf. And one of the first things we did was we arranged a series of conferences around the country. Now, I was the training manager, newly in post, never set up a conference before, but was kind of learning on the job and guided by the colleagues from Parents for Children. And we set up these conferences, which we called Bruised Before Birth. And there were 6 of them around the country. We had one in Glasgow, one Liverpool, one London, one Birmingham, one Cardiff, and one somewhere else, I can't remember now. And we had high quality speakers at these big events. There were 200 people events. Your previous guest, Raja, was the kind of the star of the conference. But we also had somebody he referred to, Ed Riley, Professor Ed Riley from San Diego University came over and spoke. Professor Peter Hepper from Belfast University was there. Dr. Mary Mather, who was, you're both nodding, you're aware of the name, I know she's kind of prominent, but at the time she was the medical advisor to TACT's adoption panel. So again, we had this knowledge that I wasn't aware of. And then we had Julia Brown, who at the time was the CEO, if you like, of the Fetal Alcohol Support Trust. So these were the speakers we had. And I went to the one in Birmingham, I'd set up all these 5, 6 conferences, but I went to the one in Birmingham and suddenly hearing from Raja, particularly from Raja, but also from Peter and from Ed and from Mary in terms of the adoption world. And I'd recently become an adoptive father. And yet fetal alcohol had never been mentioned in our preparation groups or anything like that. So suddenly hearing people on stage talking about adoption, that kind of clicked with me. And then talking about the impact of fetal alcohol, and then started to think about all these children that I'd been working with, and children I'd been working with fairly recently, including one I was quite, sort of still playing on my head. And it suddenly became obvious what the issue was. And then I sort of, after the conference, I came back like a road to Damascus kind of moment of sort of, why didn't I know about this? And so that's when I then got alongside one of the Parents for Children colleagues, somebody called Jackie LaValliant, and she put together a training program, and I helped her to deliver it. And then after a while, Sheena could no longer deliver for personal reasons, and I took over and have just been delivering, and obviously learning as I've been delivering. I mean, my first times I was really just repeating the script that Jackie had written, but as I sort of found out new bits, I would add bits in. I went to conferences, I read up, I could have studied stuff that Raja had put out, and kind of trained myself, and then started to say, we really need, as an agency, to be kind of leading on this if we can, but certainly making sure that our carers and our staff know about it. Sorry, that was a long answer to a very short question, but
no, honestly, Martin, it's tricky for me not to speak really tricky for me not to speak. Like I have to sit on my hands to stop myself speaking. I have just been mesmerised by your story there. And it's really, I actually thought I was going to start and cry at one point, because I didn't realise about your social work background. And I can only imagine what an emotive journey that's been for you for the whole, and you talked about how you feel about not the actions that you took as a professional, not knowing what you know. And we talk about this so much. Everyone's in the same boat, and we know better now. We didn't know that we just can't look back. And it's such a huge thing, because I know with my children, there are things that I did, if I allowed myself to think about some of the things that I forced them to do, that was crippling to them, and I had no idea that they had FASD, or that it was then crippling them. And I suppose it's the same for you, but I can feel the strength of your determination, and I can feel what's fueling you. And at one point, I wanted to go like that. I was so excited. I'm getting so excited about you are such there's such power in a person like you, such power from the journey that you've walked, where you've come from, and your motivations for doing what you're doing. And this road to Damascus moment, I think it happens to all of us, because if you are in the FASD world, no matter how you got there, at the point at which you realise how many children have it, how common it is, how much it impacts on their lives, you are so overwhelmed with shock that it isn't just talked about all the time, that you can't get your head around it, can you? And the people around you are like, oh gosh, I'm at FASD again. Like, not everyone's got it, and like, no, but you've got no idea how many people have, and we're punishing them for what accidentally happened to them in utero every day of their lives. So I absolutely loved that. I was gripped by it, and I didn't even have the urge to interrupt once. That's a big deal for me. Well done.
I've seen previous episodes of this, so I know that's the case.
Exactly. So I suppose what shocked me, because my next question for you was, what was back at the beginning, what was known about FASD, but actually what's really surprised me when you're talking about the parents for children. So it shows that there was a lot known. You know, if they knew enough to have created that bespoke service, the question would be, what do you think was known about it back then? And this is the bit that I struggle with, because you sometimes think, why did some groups of people know about it and other groups of people not? Like, it almost sometimes feels a bit conspiracy-ish. Like, we're not going to talk about this. We're not going to talk about this. We don't want to open this can of worms. I don't know if that's how you feel.
Yes, and I mean, when I started to get into it, I must admit, I was disappointed and surprised to find that there were little pockets of action, if you like. In the early days, there was the Fetal Alcohol Support Trust, there was FAS Aware, there was No FAS. There were groups, but they didn't seem to be any kind of joined up or power or advocating or lobbying or sort of politically with a small p organised. And therefore they were all kind of shouting, but it sounded like little whispers, whereas they needed to get together to create a voice. And it's nice to know now that there's the FASDA Alliance that is kind of doing that, and you know, the powers that be are kind of getting to understand it. The NICE guidelines and stuff like that, the all-party parliamentary group that was set up, and I actually gave evidence at that, you know, on behalf of social work, because they couldn't find anybody else from the field of social work who could give evidence. There was a midwife from Addenbrooke's who gave evidence. There was a couple of other sort of individuals, obviously Raja, but there was nobody from social work able to sort of say, this is the issue for us. So, you know, so it does feel that there's been steps been taken, and we're getting there, still slow. But I, like you, I can't understand, parents for children must have felt totally isolated, and working with this kind of specialism that local authorities don't even a lot of them didn't recognize. So I'm not sure how many referrals they got of children who were fetally affected, because they just aren't, the diagnosis isn't there. So but that's my understanding, that was their specialism. So and certainly they had specialists in it, so it was great.
That's it's come a long way, and it's really interesting to hear your perspective from social work. And I wonder, like, do you feel that social work is acknowledging that now? Do you feel social workers being trained now are more prepared? Do you feel it's still the same as what you experienced back then, or are you seeing a change?
I'm afraid I'm going to be fairly negative about that. From my experience, and yes, you said earlier I predominantly deliver training to foster carers, which is the case. Obviously, I try and encourage social workers to attend as and when they can, and I also deliver some training, particularly in South Wales, for the local safeguarding board down there. So that's a range of professionals, and I have to say that I'm not hearing any improvement in terms of understanding. And certainly when I get newly qualified social workers attending the training, I kind of single them out and say, so what have you heard about fetal alcohol in your training? And it's no, hasn't been mentioned. But equally, when I ask teachers, there's nothing in the teaching training. Some of the health visitors don't know anything about it. I've had midwives who don't know anything about it, and it's kind of, come on, this is 2020. We've had this around since 1970. That's 50 years. We should by now have incorporated it into our training programs. But I think in social work in particular, we're really fighting against a kind of a, how can I phrase this without upsetting my colleagues, because there might be social workers who watch this, but we are very hooked up on attachment, and everything is seen through an attachment lens. And I was guilty of that as well. I saw things through an attachment lens from probably about the mid-90s through to 2007.
If that's the basis of your training, if that's the foundation of everything that then that's only natural, isn't it?
Absolutely. But and it's having to sort of undo that learning, if you like, because fetal alcohol came before the attachment issues. And not saying attachment doesn't exist, but there's no point in looking for the attachment if you haven't actually looked and considered if fetal alcohol is in the foundation, because you're kind of trying to repair something that is unsound, if you like, if you put it into a building metaphor. And yet most of my colleagues, and I have in the last sort of month within my own agency, kind of tried to do a little survey to see how much, if anything, we've learned about fetal alcohol. And I have to say, I was very disappointed by the results. The vast majority of the children we work with, and over the country, TACT deals with about 700 children. The social workers who answered my survey were responsible for about 200 of those children. And of those 200, over half were deemed to have attachment problems, and only about a small handful are thought to be fetally affected. And I know from having met the foster carers, and I know having looked at the statistics, and I know from my own experience that that's rubbish, that actually most of these children are fetally affected. And social workers, and as you say, it's because of their training, are looking at the behaviours, and those behaviours can be interpreted as attachment issues or behavioural problems due to poor parenting or something. We're not understanding the impact, and so many people still feel that fetal alcohol is just the facial features. They talk about FAS. So when I'm talking about FASD, I actually always put a little S at the end, and people say, why do you do that? And I say, because I want to emphasize the plurality of this. It's a spectrum. There are it's not a condition called FASD, FASDs, and so many are on this spectrum. But we'll get there. But it's so frustrating, because it feels to me, and I'm a fairly simple bloke, but it feels to me fairly simple to actually understand alcohol, and it's a neurotoxin, a brain poison. It's not rocket science to kind of just put those two words together. And why we haven't got there, and why we're going off on sort of attachment theory and stuff, that exists, but only in smaller proportions. I've forgotten the question you asked at the start there, Jess.
I think that a lot of it, comes back to stigma, and I think that it's so deeply uncomfortable. I think that there are more social workers who would be willing to admit that, they know fine well it's this thing lurking that they don't want to face up to, because it would involve difficult conversations. They're potentially worried if they work in the world of adoption. They're worried that it would scare people off from adoption. And so they kind of sit on information that would otherwise be very helpful, because they don't want to open what they deem to be a bit of a can of worms. And it's just, I suppose my message to any social workers who are feeling like that, it's, if a child was diabetic, and you'd found a match with a family, a forever family, you wouldn't dream of not passing on that information, and you also wouldn't feel any stigma attached to it. This child has diabetes, so we're going to need to be doing this, this, and this. They're going to need this kind of specialist, and we need to be doing insulin, and it just would be a very matter-of-fact exchange, and a little level of difficulty, and that's where we need to be with FASD. But there's this whole, we don't want to talk about that, and because I think children who've touched the looked after system at any point, who haven't been exposed in utero, would be the exception. Certainly now in our times, definitely, because of how socially acceptable and easy alcohol is to obtain, and so I think.
And the advice that parents, mothers were being given, and are still being given in many places, is ambiguous. It's misleading, and it's unfair then to start blaming the mothers. I mean, what I'm very clear on is no mother would ever willingly harm their child.
Yeah.
And nobody goes into it believing that having a drink is going to do that. I think for me the big thing is the fact that within society, it's a societal kind of issue, is alcohol is so kind of prominent, and the way, when I'm doing the training, I look at some statistics around the fact that since kind of probably the early mid 70s, the drinking by young women has just increased dramatically to sort of catch up with men. Now, I'm not saying that's wrong, and sort of from my when I started drinking, we never saw a woman in a pub. It was a male only environment and stuff. It's quite right and proper that that's kind of been balanced out. But over that same period of time, we see the rise in the number of children who have emotional and behavioural difficulties. You see the rise in the children who are deemed to be autistic, the same rise in the number of children who are said to have ADHD, the same rise in the number of children who are said to have attachment issues. And that coincides with this rat graph of young women drinking. So it can't be coincidence. And, I also look at kind of figures for countries where they don't drink alcohol, particularly strict Muslim countries, and they don't have the same range of behavioural problems in terms of ADHD or autism. They don't measure, most of the ones I find don't measure attachment issues. You go to a CAMS clinic, you don't see very many Muslim children. You see lots of white working class children, if you like. So it's kind of blindingly obvious that this is alcohol. But and for me, I think I take issue with people in FASD world who talk about it as being preventable, and I appreciate that it is preventable if we stopped women from drinking. But we ain't going to do that. That's not real, and so we're always going to have it because women will be drinking, and fetal alcohol will be being caused before they know they're pregnant. And so therefore no one's to blame. It's just that's a fact of society. We've equaled out. This is one of the unforeseen consequences, if you like, of equality. But equality overall is to be applauded. So it's, sorry, again, I've gone off on one, but
no, that's, I mean, you're singing from the same hymn sheet there with you know, I think you mentioned that you heard what I said about how I view this as a societal issue rather than something caused by women drinking. And it's interesting that you talk about those rises actually in the in line with equality and women in pubs and stuff, because I recently had a conversation with some relatives, some older relative, early 80s, and we were talking about FASD, and they were saying, like, surely it's always been around, because I've never heard of it, and until I started, you know, telling them what I was doing and things. And it was interesting, and we started to talk about that, and they said, well, you know what, women were never in the pubs in my day. And we had a very similar conversation then to what you were just describing there. And there was, you know, years and years ago, there was the place for the woman in the home preparing the meals, and it was the man who went out and enjoyed a drink. And, you know, yes, equality, fantastic, everything right about that. But as you said, with that has come this huge societal shift that has come very, very quickly and with limited education. And Claire and I have spoken before about how the dangers of alcohol just aren't presented in the same way as the dangers of drugs.
Or smoking even.
Smoking. You know, we have these things in primary schools where children are educated of how harmful these things are, but alcohol is not mentioned yet. Yeah, it's so widely accepted. And
yeah,
you know, now we're almost playing catch up again to educate everybody about the harms of what we've been doing for the last however many decades.
Yeah, absolutely. It just, talking about the fact that, you know, sort of it seems to be a modern phenomenon. I can't take the credit for this, because I unfortunately can't remember who it was who delivered the training. I went on a conference or something, and somebody showed Hogarth's slides of Gin Lane and Beer Street. And Gin Lane, his paintings show women with little babies at, you know, at the breast feeding and sitting in the gutter, and the paintings have almost painted facial features, smooth philtrums, thin lips, narrow eyes. You know, the women who were affected by gin, because that was the tipple in those days when water wasn't safe and they were drinking gin, you know, whereas the men were in Beer Street, and that was a lot happier scene, because it's kind of milder, if you like. So it's been around, but hey.
I think it all comes back to, we know better now. We know better, and I think that's what sometimes frustrates people working in this field, because we know better. We've known better for quite a while now, and I think we get a bit frustrated that we want to do better a little bit faster. But you touched on the nice quality standards, so that they definitely are going to be out in the new year, and everything's started back up again because COVID kind of slowed all of that up, but they're definitely back on track now. So that should hopefully, because there are so many pockets of amazing work happening, like you said, but something as big as NICE, which is going to impact the NHS, that is going to make a really, really big shift. It will be slow.
Yeah.
It will be slow, but it will be irreversible. And that's the thing we've got to focus on. It's going to start and push these huge cogs forward that can't go back, but they're going to take a while to pick up momentum. But it is happening. And
it's just good that Scotland have led the way in a sense, and England are playing catch up. Wales haven't even caught up to England yet, but hopefully they will do. But yeah, the NICE guidance is certainly a good sign. So the Fetal Alcohol Alliance is a really good sign. And there are, as you say, pockets. This podcast you're contacting, you're in, you know, you've got 1,500 people following you. it's brilliant, because that's getting the message out as well. I don't know whether you're familiar with the Adoption Hub, the FASDA Hub in Scotland that's run by Adoption UK. I mean, it's a great resource that Scotland have put there, and of course the internet doesn't respect borders, so it's available to anybody basically. Yeah. Albeit that we can't in England offer the pathways that they do in Scotland. But I certainly know when I go to Scotland and deliver training, because we've got officers there, the level of knowledge amongst professionals and amongst the carers is a lot more than it is when I'm delivering in England.
I think that a huge part of that is the fact of where Scotland are with the whole ACEs thing. That, you know, I think that it's opened up a lot of people's minds to other reasons, that a lot of things aren't just behaviour. And I know there's lots of people have very, very mixed feelings about the whole ACEs thing, so adverse childhood experiences, if anyone doesn't know what that is. But I just feel that it you know, whether we like it or not, I do feel that's played quite a role in the momentum that Scotland has built up around those kind of areas, definitely, because they are streets ahead of us without a shadow of a doubt, and we're following hot on the heels. Yeah, I
would agree, but I personally have reservations about ACEs, because fetal alcohol doesn't actually feature in the ACEs checklist, because it is pre-birth, it isn't a childhood experience, and it kind of almost again reroutes people to thinking about what happens to the child post-birth and doesn't go before birth. So whilst I can see some merit to the ACEs, I'd wish they extended it to some other abbreviation that would take in from conception, you know.
I know that's just happened in England in the CAM system. I was part of a group that worked together to create the new trauma pathway for CAMS. So it was for the CAMS clinicians to be using. And, you know, I definitely will say this, if I wasn't there as a layperson, as a part of all of that, and the people involved would agree with this, it was me that got the whole in utero pre-birth section put on that trauma pathway, because it wasn't there. It was from birth. And I was like, hang on a minute, everything that happened to my children happened before they were even born, let alone not even before they were verbal, before they were born. So if we may as well not be doing this trauma pathway if we're not going to look at that, because it plays such a huge role. So now it's a massive part. It's a huge part of that. So the inroads are definitely getting deeper. They really are. It's just going to, you know, I think, you know, in another 10 years, it'll be very different, but we will probably still be a little bit frustrated where we are, but we'll be in a much better place than we are now. Yeah. So I was thinking, when you're delivering your training, specifically to foster carers, what kind of questions do you find come up frequently, or are there any questions that come up frequently?
Oh yeah, there are some that I guarantee I'm going to get. I'd almost play kind of question bingo with myself as to which ones I'm going to get. Although I think the biggest impact for me, and one of the delights in doing the training, is that as I'm delivering, I see light bulbs going on in people. As I'm talking, I see people whispering to their next one saying, that's how, you know, that was. And at every coffee break, I get people coming up with their phones and saying, that's my Ben, you know, that's my little one. Do you think, can you see? And so I'm not making a diagnosis over a phone. I'm not medical, but yes, from what you're showing me, it's either a bad photo or you probably got fetal alcohol. But in terms of common questions, I think the humorous one I know is going to come up all the time is, if the father's drinking, would that cause it? Which it just always amuses me on that one. It's almost as if we've got to get men roped into this somehow. So, but the key ones I guess I get asked are, how can I get a diagnosis? And that's not an easy one to answer. How can I persuade other professionals, if I haven't got a diagnosis, that this is the issue? They're probably the two hardest ones that I have to answer. And get asked virtually every time, because diagnosis is so difficult, and it's so there's so many kind of bureaucratic loops and hoops to get through. Easier for adoptive parents because there's adoption support funding that can sometimes be used for that, but in fostering terms it's just not there. And the lack of awareness from other professionals, from social workers, from the schools, and even from GPs and stuff, that's the real frustration, because people come back to my training sometimes the second time and I say, well, why are you here again? Because this is exactly the same training with the same bad jokes in it. Why are you coming again? And they say, well, I came to your first one and I'm convinced that, but when I went back, people didn't know about it. So I've come back now to really listen and to kind of be equipping myself, arming myself, finding the evidence so I can go back and almost they come almost for a sort of a booster charge of I'm gonna get this diagnosis, because we always say that foster care is one of the kind of aspects of their job description is to be a pain in the backside. They've got to be the advocate for their child. They've got to fight for the child, and believe me, foster carers do that job really, really well. But they need somebody who's there to support them. And often, even within my own agency, our social workers don't fully understand fetal alcohol. So, it's kind of come back to me through the sort of research I've done recently that I've really got to redouble my efforts, even within my own agency. We've only got 100 social workers, but then we've got to get those 100 social workers out into a local authorities, spreading the message. So I think those are the two most frequent questions I get asked. Just trying to think if there's any others. No, I think that's. Oh, I suppose the other bit would be just so many people think it's just the facial features.
Yeah.
So ARND, alcohol-related neurodevelopmental disorder, is just nobody's ever heard of it when I'm delivering the training, and yet that, as we know, and I know I'm talking to people who know about it, but that's by far the majority. Children who look completely normal, but their behaviours would suggest something different. And it's just, it's the light bulbs. That's for me. That's the bit that I see going around the room.
I think with a diagnosis of ARND, which is a very, very common diagnosis, and that's why, because at the minute there's a shift to change the language in the FASD world a little bit and to go away from FAS, ARND, and just to be using FASDs, to be using that, and it's a spectrum and every child is different. But I think that it's very, that's the diagnosis that my children have, and I think that more than, I can't even count how many times I've been in a situation with professionals who've tried to use that diagnosis to say, yeah, but it's not real, it's not fetal alcohol syndrome, it's not like the full one. I've had a social worker say that before. It's not like the full one, and they just, quite often they haven't got the knowledge. They haven't got the knowledge. What's terrifying is the life-changing decisions and the life-impacting decisions that they're making with that lack of knowledge. So I think and I can imagine, when you were talking there, I was picturing foster carers coming back onto your training for the second time, almost like a train the trainer event, training themselves again, coming back again to listen purely with the thought of, I'm going to deliver this to every person I come in contact with, whether they like it or not. And you become, I've lost count of how many times I've been told that I'm intimidating. I was told by a social worker that I was intimidating because I was well informed, and you just think it's like you don't want to be a pain in the backside. You certainly don't want to be intimidating. But when it comes to your child having this invisible disability, this invisible brain injury, you've got to scream for people to listen. And just not have them labelled as, they're just the real handful, they're just naughty, they're wild, out of control. It's relentless, and I just know that you know, I can only imagine the extra hardships that foster carers have because of all of the red tape that they've got to operate within, the confines that they've got to operate within, where they are parenting these children but don't quite have the power of a parent to be, you know, the autonomy of the parents. Hats off to foster carers, because I just think that they've got a whole other level of complexity, and, you know, love the children just as much as any other mother or father, but are having to battle a system that is trying to control them as well. So I think that's a whole other level of complexity. So it really makes me happy that the bulk of your time is spent training, or your bulk of your training time is spent on foster carers, because, you know, that is where we absolutely have to start, because they are the first point of call, frontline in this situation.
But life would be so much easier for them if the people with parental responsibility, the local authorities, birth parents, even our staff who support them, also understood fetal alcohol. They haven't then got to battle that. They've got open doors they're pushing at. But yeah, you're absolutely right that they're a very key cohort of people, and doing a tremendous job. So, you know, we're very grateful to our carers who do a great job. But I say I just love the light bulb moments, and at least they then go away, and I think it changes the way they parent. And because I talk about the fact that you may not get a diagnosis because diagnosis is so difficult, but what you've got to get is a diagnosis with a small d, in inverted commas, which is an internal diagnosis, and understanding that actually I need to just reframe this behavior. This behavior isn't a child who won't, it's a child who can't. And it's not their fault. It came from before they were born, and it just changes your mindset. And that's what I hope people go away with, that concept, and also, you know, some strategies to try and help them to mitigate the behaviours that they're dealing with, and, you know, just keep their fingers crossed it works for them. But yeah, it is about kind of constantly having to fight those battles from foster carers' points of view, which is a nightmare. It's a lot easier being an adopter when you've got that parental responsibility. You know, you are the child's parent, so you haven't got to answer to anybody. You can be a pain in the backside for your child. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it is. It's so I'm just sitting nodding away as you're talking there, because when I delivered FASD training myself, you can see the light bulbs, all the light bulbs, and you have people that come back to you or come up to you during the sessions and things and say, there was this child, and then there was this other, it's everywhere, and you can see they start ticking through their brains, and they're like, that one, that one, that one, that one, that one, that one. Yeah, but it's, you know, it's really, really wonderful to hear you talk about the work that you're doing, and, you know, we wish you all the best and hope that you continue to spread that message far and wide and loud, and from all the rooftops that you know, we're also trying to shout from. And yeah, and just want to say a big shout out to social workers as well. You know, they do have a very, very tough job, and we're all in agreement here. I just want to make it very, very clear that we have huge respect for social workers and everything they do. And this is what we're saying here is very much about the training. This is a systematic failure at the level of training for social workers, for midwives, for paediatricians, for psychologists,
teachers as well. Definitely teachers.
Teachers, definitely. You know, this is nobody doing their jobs wrong. This is something that we want to. Claire and I might start storming some universities and
yes, getting the teaching, yeah, definitely, because they're doing the job in effect. They're expected to do a job blindfolded when it comes to FASD, and I can't. When especially teachers, I think it's extraordinary that a teacher, certainly in my situation, was able to function and deal with 29 other children in a class, and one of my children with undiagnosed FASD, and then even when it was diagnosed, they were fully reliant on me to tell them everything they needed to know about it. And I just think that it's extraordinary that teachers are doing that and spending so much time with our children in a way that social workers never would spend that amount of time. So, you know, to me, like the next port of call would definitely be teachers, because it's there. We can't change it. It is there. These are the people who are with our children for the biggest bulk of time, and they've got the odds stacked against them because it isn't in their training, and it needs to be.
I did a presentation, as I say, for a local safeguarding board down in South Wales, one of the boroughs down there, and the head teacher was in the audience, and he came to me at the end and said, "Can I have my business card?" And the next thing was, we'd arranged, he'd come there as an individual, but he then set up another training for me to deliver to all the staff in his school and all the feeder schools in his area to his school. So, you know, suddenly 40 teachers sat there, and the little light bulbs thinking, that's Tommy in class 2, that's Bertie in class 4, you know, you could see them clicking and realizing, you know, and it just sort of, the way that cascades. But unfortunately, teachers didn't have the time for the training, and they don't have the budgets and stuff like that. So there's all kinds of structural issues as to why it's not happening. But getting into the universities, teacher training courses, social work training courses has to be the key way forward, really, from a professional point of view.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Well, I think, Martin, we could sit and talk to you all night.
I think can't. My wife's cooking a curry, and I can smell it.
Well, we better end it there then. We wouldn't want to upset your wife if dinner's nearly on the table. But thank you again so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure. It's absolutely fantastic speaking with you and hearing about your journey. And
I've loved listening to every word of it. It's really, really given me a real boost of positivity and a real boost of hope. It really has. I've been quite surprised by a lot of it, which is lovely, I think, to when you're not expecting the story to go the way that you imagined it would. So I think it's incredible work that you're doing, and I'm sure that we'll constantly keep in touch and
I hope
keep
so.
helping each other. Yeah.
Paths will cross, and certainly I'll be telling people on training about the spotlights on FASDs to look at. I'm probably suggesting they have pancakes for Christmas Day as well.
Yes, definitely make life easier.
All right.
Okay.
Good work. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Take care.